I'm very happy to welcome Professor Andrea Pinotti, who's a full professor in aesthetics in the Department of Philosophy, Piero Martinetti at the State University of Milan, and is a president of the Scientific Council of the Fondation Maisons des Sciences de l'Homme in Paris. The talk is called Cyber-Theo, Reflections on the Theological Roots of Contemporary Digital Technologies. And the way this talk will work and all the other talks today will work is that we will have 15 minutes for the talk and then 15 minutes for questions. For the questions, you can either write on the chat or just wait until the end and you can speak a little bit and so on. So thank you so much, Professor Pinotti, for joining us, and please go ahead with your talk.
Great. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present my research project here, my writing project, Cyber-Theo, Reflections on the Theological Roots of Contemporary Digital Technologies, as already anticipated by Paulius. Because of time constraints, of course, I will be very schematic, but also I will look forward to your comments. So my starting point from a methodological point of view is an idea put forward by Walter Benjamin in the mid-30s. Benjamin was one of the first philosophers, as you know, to acknowledge the philosophical implications of the new, at the time, media, and more generally of technology. And Benjamin observes how the new forms of modernity, in order to distance themselves from the near past, perceived as antiquated, these new forms ended up reactivating experiential traits of the archaic past. For example, the descent into the Paris subway as a reformulation of the descent into the underworld. This passage that I have quoted here from an exposé of his famous unfinished work on the 19th century Paris and the arcades, Benjamin speaks of an interpenetration of the new with the primordial, primal, archaic world. I think this is a methodologically fruitful suggestion to explore some relevant aspects of our contemporary digital technologies. I will go chapter by chapter of what I am planning to write as an essay or perhaps a volume on this interpenetration. First of all, the very notion of icon, the term which we use to characterize the user-friendly interfaces of our screens. This term has a history stretching back thousands of years. The Greek word eikon, which generally means image, in the strictest sense is the sacred image in the Byzantine tradition. An image not only to be looked at with the eyes, but also to be touched and kissed in the act of veneration. With consequent, as you can see from the image on the right of the slide, with consequent consumption of the material object itself. Let us not forget that the very term digital, which we usually refer to as digit in the sense of numeral, of the numerical digit, the digital has its etymological roots in the Latin digitus, the finger. So the touch screen, on which we touch icons, is in this sense the secularized hair of the sacred icon as a digital image to be touched with the finger. Real presence, a strand of research around new technologies of admettre. Claire, tu peux m'aider pour admettre? We have an admission of a new listener. Thanks. A strand of research around new technologies of digital image production and reception, especially with regard to immersive environments, goes by the name of presence studies. The idea behind such research is that the concept of representation, image as image of something, is no longer adequate to understand the effect of immediate presence that I experience in the immersive world with respect to myself. I am present there, and with respect to the digital entities I encounter there in the immersive environment. So we have a conflict between two models: presence on the one side, representation on the other side. A conflict which goes back to the theological discussions about the mere representational functions of icons, because if the icon were divine, you would have a multiplication of the divinities, and so polytheism, as opposed to the real presence of the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. Another issue is the issue of the avatars, and as related to the notion of incarnation. So a particularly effective way of being present in immersive worlds is to assume, as you know, an avatar. We embody ourselves into an avatar as into a digital proxy through which we enter the artificial simulated worlds, to things there, respond to affordances, execute agencies, interact with other subjects in a kind of synthetic polis, a common shared public space. As a surrogate of or a representative of the subject's identity, the practice of the avatar is at the same time new and old. The very term avatar belongs to the ancient Hindu tradition. The Sanskrit word avatara designates the terrestrial descent of a divinity, mostly Vishnu, who decides to temporarily interfere with earthly affairs when these affairs perturb the cosmic order. The specific forms which the deity can embody vary according to the circumstances. Vishnu can appear as a fish, as a tortoise, as a boar, a man-lion, a dwarf. Today, we would call it a fluid identity. So, as the studies in comparative history of religions have shown, avatar is a Hindu way to refer to incarnation. And in some syncretistic traditions, also Jesus Christ is called the avatar of God. So this calls for a multicultural comparative approach in history and theory of religion. The experience of feeling present in the immersive environment, especially when you wear a VR headset, is often characterized with the expression being there. We are in our room, comfortably seated in our gamer chair, and at the same time, in the headset, we are traveling at crazy speed on a roller coaster. The promise of being in two places at once is the secularized version, again, of the miracle of bilocation, being here and there simultaneously. A miracle which many religions attribute to sages, to saints, holy men, Pythagoras, Apollonius of Tyana, St. Francis of Assisi, as depicted here by Giotto in Florence. Again, a topic which can be addressed from a multicultural perspective of comparative religious studies, because in the case of bilocation, also the guru of Yogananda was responsible for the introduction of yoga in Western culture. His master, Sri Yukteswar, was also able to bilocate according to the tradition and to the autobiography of a yogi written by Yogananda. The problem and the issue and the desire, if you want, of God's eye, so the capacity of seeing in a panoramatic way, in a 360 way, in the totality of the visual field, as attested, for example, in the Old Testament, in the book of Job, or in the Gospels here in Matthew, as you can see from this quotation. So if we consider developments in photography, we realize that the 360-degree view, which is typical of immersive virtual reality environments, this trend has purposely infected even the simplest smartphones. There is a strong urge to go beyond the limits imposed by the frame. One wants to see more. Indeed, one wants to see everything. Think, for example, of the panorama function now included in all the lenses of our mobile phones. So the idea that you are no longer satisfied with the framed picture taken in the conventional photography, but you want to see more, and possibly everything around you. Artificial intelligence has taken up and relaunched this challenge. Thanks to text-to-image prompts, I can, for example, provide here in the outpainting algorithm of DALL-E, I can provide information on the epoch, on the geographical and cultural environment of the famous girl with a pearl earring painted by Vermeer, to broaden the vision, to see more, to discover, for example, what the room in which the Netherlandish painter immortalized her was like. In his famous book dedicated to photography, Camera Lucida, Roland Barthes, it was 1980, stated that the grammatical time of the photographic image is the past tense. Indeed, if I take a selfie now and look at myself a second later, my face, as young as the screen of my mobile phone shows it to me, will never be again. It is now past. On the contrary, artificial intelligence applied to so-called post-photography allows me to have an image of the future. I take a picture of myself now, and I can see in a kind of inverted indexicality how I will look like in 5, 10, 20 years. So this is a phenomenon which seems to resemble clairvoyance or prophecy in a way. You can see the future in the photograph and not only the past. The traditional account of the ontological status of the photographic image rests on the notion of index, as proposed by the semiotician Peirce. The index is the effect of a cause. It is necessary for someone or something to have been in front of the camera lens in order for there to be a photograph of it. In the post-photography advocated by artificial intelligence, on the contrary, we can have a paraphotographic image that is a picture which has the effect of being a photograph without actually being a real photographic picture. For example, in this case of this project by Philip Wang, every time you click on this link, you have on the screen the manifestation of what appears to be a photographic portrait, but the person related to this portrait, as the title of this project states, does not exist. So it appears to be a photographic portrait of a flesh and blood individual without that individual ever having existed. So it's a kind of, as they say in the Christian tradition, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. Nothing is there to be photographed. Another example is the resurrection of the dead. If we move to the field of augmented reality and specifically so-called holograms. Here we encounter the real resurrection of the dead. For instance, the case of Michael Jackson has resurrected in order to be included in a live concert, as you can see from this video. Here you can see Michael resurrected, enslaved to the rhythm. Holograms. Finally, the most powerful desire ever, that of being immortal. The TV series Black Mirror imagined in this episode of season 3, episode 4, the idea of transferring memory and consciousness into a young body that continues to live in a simulated world, a world parallel to the real one. Instead, in the real one, the original body suffering from a terminal illness has been euthanized. For now, this last slide, as opposed to the previous ones, is just a dream entrusted to a TV series, but who knows what will happen next. I conclude by returning to, in a kind of roundabout, to the beginning of my talk, to that quote by Benjamin. But now I want to underline a different aspect I have emphasized this time in blue. Because a further element underlined by Benjamin is the role played by utopia, daydreaming, collective desire, a series of themes that converge in what he calls phantasmagoria. Phantasmagoria is not a byproduct, or worse, a waste product of scientific and technological progress at the disposal of the capitalist exploitation of the cultural industry. On the contrary, the utopian and dreamlike and oniric dimension plays a leading role in shaping the advent of the new media, not only structuring the rhetoric and ideology of the discourses that conceptualize them, but also directing the very development of the technological inventions of subsequent epochs. Think, for example, of science fiction that prefigures future technological devices that will then actually be realized. It is in this sense that Benjamin, speaking explicitly of prophecies, quotes Jules Michelet, the French historian, each epoch dreams of the next. So when I quoted this text, this passage, at the beginning of my talk, I underlined the relation to the archaic and primeval past. This time, I emphasize the opening and the horizon towards the dreamed future. And I think I will stop here. I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Thank you everyone for being here. Yes, I guess we can open the floor for questions. Yes, and in the meantime, Enrico.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, Andrea. Hello, everybody. I have a question on a possible disanalogy between technology and the sort of miracles or supernatural phenomena that you have presented. The latter are, I said, supernatural phenomena. So what's striking in them is that they challenge the laws of nature, while the technological phenomena you presented are not supernatural at all. Indeed, they are the outcome of science, of applied science, technology as applied science. So they are not challenging natural laws, but rather exploiting natural laws, but they are perfectly compatible with what we know and what we believe about the way in which the world functions. So I was just wondering whether this analogy can play a role in your discussion of this topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Enrico, very much for this question. I would say that what distinguishes natural and supernatural is sometimes a matter of time and historicity in a way, you know, because if you read some novels, for example, by Jules Verne, they seem to speak and tell about supernatural phenomena and events. And then reading these novels from the point of view of our present, you understand that he is describing, for example, holograms, which have become something perfectly natural and perfectly understandable in terms of natural laws. So the historical index is always to be taken into consideration when we say it is natural, it is supernatural. But certainly, it is also true that I think, for example, in the case of immortality, that you would keep your point and say that it is not a question of historicity and historical index of these qualifications, supernatural and natural. But in that case, I would insist on the rhetoric and the ideological discourses and the desire and the promises, which is not only, as I said, a matter of exploitation in capitalistic terms of the industrial in cultural industry, say, for example, in advertising of these new technologies and these new products. But I think that it impacts is based on deep human anthropological desires, which at the same time are a kind of fuel for the engine of technological developments.
Great, thank you very much. Henry?
Yes, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I really enjoyed the ride. But I was missing maybe a little bit your interpretation of these similarities that you have observed, I mean, through the various examples. For example, your first example is about the use of the word icon. And you note that this word is used both in a technological sense and also in a divine sense. But to which extent is there any purpose or meaning behind these two usages of the same word? I mean, an icon in an iPad, or even before that, icons were also used to designate apps you could find on computers. So apps and icons actually pre-existed the iPad. These are pure; they have a purely functional effect, whereas icons in Christianity, for example, serves the purpose of worship and connecting to a spiritual world, which is not the case. Or maybe you will say that that it is, but many people would maybe say, okay, this is just a functional dimension, a way to access a function in a machine. Similarly, with this notion of avatars, for example, in religion, divine avatars pre-exists humanity, but in computer games, they serve exactly the opposite purpose, namely of being created by us to represent some of our personal ideals or the way that we would like to see ourselves represented. So again, yes, they are both avatars, but they also serve very different functions. So on the basis of this comment, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more where you find sort of the deeper connection between these similar usages of words in science and religion, respectively. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Henrik, for your comments. Of course, I am not claiming that these new phenomena related to image production and reception technologies are the same as in the other more archaic elements. I am interested in the reviviscence of different ways of experiencing the image as compared to the conventional ones, for example, that have been in place since the establishment of the aesthetics as an academic discipline, which is more or less at the same time contemporary of the institution museum. In the museum, still nowadays, the policy, as you well know, is look but don't touch. So images are assigned to a mainly, if not exclusively, optical way of reception. Whereas both in religious icons and in touchscreens, you have a more direct and integral, I would say, engagement of our bodily, peripersonal implication, touching, haptic. So just think, for example, I am also interested in how these technologies change our sensorium, our aesthesis. Think of how quickly we have become touch. My mother, she is 87 and she touches her screens all day long. No? She certainly was not a native touch, but nowadays we have native touch generations, no? for which the experience of the image is no longer a mainly optical one. If you cannot zoom, manipulate, rotate the image, it is no longer an image because there's no haptic access to the image. So I think that this is something which is worthwhile analyzing in terms of course, it is not the same, I'm not claiming, but I'm also interested in the secularization process. In the secularization process, as described, for example, by Max Weber, you have the some traits which resist and are stable, and some aspects which take in new forms of existence and experience. And this intertwining, this interpenetrating nature of the new and the old is what interested me. Of course, avatars is tricky because avatars, as you know, you can shape them personally, so you can invent them in a way, you can create them, or you can choose them from a library, from a catalog. And so you have both experiences that you represent yourself in an avatar, and the spectrum goes from the photorealistic image to the totally non-identifiable image of an inert thing or an animal, or if you are male, a female, or you can change sex, gender, and whatever. But you can also find avatars, and you choose avatars in a kind of preformed, predetermined way. So this has to do also with the relationship between self-determination and self-representation. What interests me is also in your questions, you posed the stress, the accent on the notion of the functional. And I think that avatars and icons, both in the ancient and in the contemporary term, at least share the idea and the nature of being operational images. So images that are not there for an aesthetic, uninterested contemplation, like, for example, in the Kantian tradition, you have the image, typically the image in a museum, and you contemplate this image because it's beautiful, it has an aesthetic value, but it is not useful. You cannot include this image in the chain of the teleological relationships of mean and end. On the contrary, religious images are operational because you want to get something from the image. You want the image to put you in contact with the invisible world. You wish, for example, in the ex voto to get some favors from the divinity you are worshiping. Think of the totem, think of all the idols and the sacred images in rituals. There's a lot of magic in Christianity too, as well. So, for example, my grandmother used to have her own images of the saints, which were very banal and trivial reproductions of Saint Anthony, but the one which she possessed had that magic power. So the threshold between orthodoxy in Christianity and magic is very thin, as we in popular religion, as we know. So it's the operational nature of these images which makes them images that you do not contemplate in an optical way of perceiving them, but you rather use them in a chain of practical function, even if the practical can be intended in a very spiritual sense, in a very religious sense.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This is, yes, all the time we have for this talk and the questions. Thank you so much, Professor Pinotti, for being in this talk.